start the recording. Well, good afternoon, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our meeting today. My name is Mickey Brock. I'm the treasurer of Houston LERA, and I wanted to make a few introductory comments before we get started. First of all, I'd just like you to be aware that Mishell Parreno Taylor has taken over as Houston LERA president, and you'll be hearing more from her over the weeks and months to come. So congratulations, Mishell. I know you're going to do a great job. The National Academy of Arbitrators, in partnership with Houston LERA, has put together what I think is going to be a fantastic program for today. And I want to highlight the significant work that National Academy of Arbitrators members, Will Hartsfield, Betty Widgeon, and John Alfano did in developing this program. They spent a lot of time on it, and I know it's going to be a great one. This is a follow-up of a program that we did earlier that Houston LERA did, and John and Betty presented in that one. And it was an excellent program, so this is going to be very good. And then I want you to be aware that there's a second part of this program that's going to be presented in person at the Southwest Rockies NAA conference in Houston on February the 21st. This is really an excellent conference, and it's being held from February 20th to 22nd. And if you haven't registered for it, I would highly encourage you to do that. It's something you really don't want to miss. I will send out some information on it just in case you've missed the communications, but it's a really good conference. More about the presenters in a moment, but I really want to thank them for taking the time out of their schedules, not only in developing the program, but in making the presentation today. I want to give special thanks to Emily Smith, Executive Director of National LERA, and Bernadette Tiemann, Membership and Marketing Coordinator for National LERA, for partnering with us, and they just help us out in many ways. They help all of the chapters, but and also for providing the technical support today. Just a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions, you can put them in chat, but this is intended to be an interactive meeting, so if you have questions, raise them as they're going through the materials, and they will answer them at an appropriate time. We are recording this meeting. The charts and the recording will be placed on our website for member access. So if you're not a member, you won't be able to access it. So we hope you will join Houston LERA. We do ask that you do not personally record this program. I want to thank Moretta Tate, who has been tireless in getting our Texas MCLE attorney credits. We have 1.5 hours of MCLE credits and 1.5 hours of ethics credits for this program. Unfortunately, this is only going to apply to Texas attorneys. And during the program, if you would put your name and your Texas bar number into chat, later in the program, we'll put in the course number so that you will be able to use that to submit your MCLE credit for yourself with the provided number. The program has also been approved for 1.5 hours of SHRM recertification credits, and we'll ask you if you would put SHRM recertification credits and then your name and your email address and your cell phone if you want to apply for those. The program is scheduled to end at 1:30. However, the panelists will be available until 2 o'clock for those that want to continue the discussion, and that conversation will be recorded. We're really pleased to have John Alfano moderating our program today. John, as he said, is just recently retired, but he's been he's a member of the National Academy of Arbitrators, has been an arbitrator and mediator in the private sector for in a private practice for since 1983. His career includes serving as a local teacher union officer, serving on the main panel of Mediators, and he's an affiliate faculty member at Penn State. He actively serves on various NAA committees, and most recently, he's been heavily involved in the NAA's New England Region Diversity, Inclusion, and Education and Belonging Committee. I'll now turn the program over to John. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mickey. Thanks, folks, for being here. I hope we meet your needs, and I hope you enjoy the program. We have with us, the program is the ethical obligations of advocates and arbitrators and mediators. We want to keep it interactive, and we need a lot of audience participation. We can talk forever as panelists, but we really learn from each other, and as we discuss and share different ideas, it will make a much better program and a better learning experience for all of us. As Mickey said, we will stay after the program to continue any discussions you want to continue about DEI. We're always available for that. Our panelists today are Sarah Garrity, Lisa Timmons, who is pitch hitting for Betty Widgeon, who is enjoying herself at an arbitration somewhere in Kentucky, and Mishell Parreno Taylor from Akerman LLP, and Rod Tanner from Tanner Associates. First off, I'd like to introduce Lisa. Lisa has her law degree from cum laude from the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law. She has a master's in dispute resolution from Wayne State, and she has a Bachelor of Arts degree in communications from Michigan State. I can't, Lisa is so active, I could go on forever about some of her accomplishments in her short activity as an arbitrator, but she seems to be everywhere. And she's very interesting and quite accomplished in all phases of labor relations and the law. Also, we have, let me bring up the other program. We have Sarah Garrity, who is also an arbitrator and actually a neutral. She does mediation and arbitration. She had been on with the Massachusetts Labor Relations Commission. She's on the Mass Board of Conciliation and also involved in the DEIB Committee for the New England region. She's been quite active, and the more I work with Sarah, the more interesting she becomes. I learn something different about her every time. Totally surprises me. Mishell Parreno Taylor, who I just met today, she's employment litigation in federal and state courts and administrative agencies. And she's a member of the law firm of, what is that? Oh, I'm sorry, Mishell.
Akerman, no problem, John.
Okay. Do you represent management or labor?
I do. I represent management. I straddle California and Texas are my practice. So the two bookends of employment law. Okay. So it should be an interesting conversation.
Okay. And also we have Rod Taylor. He's a union attorney. He's a founding shareholder of Tanner Associates in Fort Worth. He focuses on labor and employment law practice, civil litigation, administration proceedings, and arbitration and collective bargaining. He has clients in the union side of the business. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And we welcome you. Also, the more extensive bios are available on the website, the LERA chapter, LERA website. So you can get more information that way about us if you're interested. And if you call me personally, I could talk forever about myself. So please don't hesitate if you feel the need. Next, what I'd like to do is go to the slides. Lisa, can you pop them up? The various slides that we have that we're going to refer to. Okay, we're looking at, yeah, we have the Code of Professional
I'm
Responsibilities.
sorry, here's the first one. Go ahead.
Okay, Code of Professional Responsibilities for Arbitrators of Labor and Labor Management Disputes. You can see that, you know, there are two areas that we're going to focus on. The second one is the Texas Disciplinary Rules of Professional Conduct. We will focus again on section A and B, dealing with discrimination. C is the ABA model, rules of professional conduct. Again, we'll deal with harassment and discrimination. The next one is Society for Human Resource Management, which is actually SHRM, Professional Code of Conduct. Again, we're going to deal with the ethics responsibilities, dealing with discrimination and other relationships to each other. And finally, the Texas Lawyers Creed, which is also covers 4 sections that we are going to be relying on for our discussion. As you can see, they all have a lot of overlap. The common threads that run through them are honesty, integrity, impartiality, competence, bias or prejudice by words or conduct, harassing or discriminatory conduct, fairness, respect, civility, and respect for the judiciary. And finally, it does the behavior, our organizational behavior, add value to organizations and contribute to their ethical success. We have pulled together several scenarios that demonstrate the requirements and prohibitions under each of these codes and rules, but this program is interactive, folks, so we encourage you and look forward to your joining in and participating throughout the discussion. This will not be successful without your participation. Before we go to the scenarios, the committee will provide a little background on the intersection between DEIB and the ethical obligations of advocates and arbitrators, and background experiences that have led each of us to focus more on both of these in our practices. But before we do that, we have a montage of discriminatory behavior, cartoons, ads, etc., for you to view, just to get us in the mood.
Many stamps today. Give kiddies. We'll be blessed. We all invest in the USA. Sammy. I'm not going to steal your Fritos corn chips. I buy them from you, okay? Hey, maybe you like better some lead, huh?
Citizens, protect yourselves.
Shanghai, Hong Kong, ik Fuyang. To demonstrate how to constructing the delicious Japanese club sandwich. Slice of bread ration card, so. Place a piece of a meat ration card, so. Then eat them. Oh, yum, yum, sandwich.
Gonna catch me a rabbit. Well, shut my mouth. Where the tracks?
All racial and ethnic groups have been caricatured in this country. But the truth is, no group has been caricatured as much and in as many ways as have African Americans. Caricatures become rationalizations for the denial of opportunities. If, for example, you believe the caricature of African American men as coons, meaning lazy ne'er-do-wells, ignorant, people who are cultural parasites, if you perpetuate that caricature and accept that caricature, then that becomes a rationalization for denying African Americans the right to vote, to attend good schools. It becomes, indeed, a rationalization for supporting Jim Crow.
Hey, listen, you see this little game we have over here? Yeah. That's what they call the African Dodger. Oh. Now, I usually have a little color boy that stands behind there, places his head in the hole, and the natives come along and throw the balls at them. Fantastic, isn't it?
Thank you, Lisa. I don't know how many times I've seen those, and they just make me, I don't know how to describe how I feel. What I'd like to do is Sarah and Lisa and I have been on the DEIB committee for the New England group, and we'd like to relate some incidents about ourselves that have helped us along with this developing a program. Sarah?
Sure. So I grew up in a politically liberal and mostly white world. I assumed that the people around me were not racist. I knew there was racism, but that was in other places and with other types of people. It was only later when I began to recognize the subtle and not so subtle effects of sexism that I sensed that what I was experiencing was widely applicable to other groups and identities. When the New England region and the NAA started a DEIB committee, I enthusiastically joined. We started looking around for potential speakers, videos, and tools that we could put into education programs about bias and arbitration. Two of them fundamentally changed the way I looked at bias. The first was a webinar that described the neurology of prejudice, how our brains store and categorize information. To deal with the volume the brain takes in, it uses shortcuts to categorize similar inputs. The good news is that we need that ability to digest experiences quickly and efficiently. The bad news is exemplified by the racist montage that you just viewed. The brain's shortcuts create stereotypes, and this process is unconscious, implicit, and inevitable. The second wake-up call came when I took and retook Harvard Implicit Association tests. These are basically speed tests that force very quick choices and that reveal implicit bias against various demographics. I failed these tests with disturbing regularity. They showed me that I could not avoid the biases that have been baked into me, yet it was easier to override knee-jerk assumptions and to reject them once I admitted to myself that they were there. The antidote to implicit bias is recognition and then a willingness to change. We can learn to notice more about our false assumptions, and that's a first step. I try to apply that in my arbitration practice. These efforts can be as simple as remembering to introduce myself to everyone in the room and make sure that when I'm chatting with the attorneys during breaks in the hearing, I bring others into the conversation. As we work through the scenarios under the various codes of ethics today, we'll analyze incidents of implicit and explicit bias in arbitration that are more than unkind. We'll discuss whether they're also unethical.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Lisa, do you want to go next?
Sarah really summed up everything I could say, but I just want to add just a couple points from my own personal perspective. I grew up, my mother was a divorced single woman. She was working full time, divorced when I was probably 3 years old. So she was working full time and going to grad school in the evenings. So to assist with that, I lived with my grandparents for considerable amount of time during my childhood. My grandfather was from Grambling, Louisiana. My grandmother was from El Dorado, Arkansas. She was born in 1920. My grandfather, 1923. They came up to Michigan to work in the auto industry, and my grandmother was a professional nurse. And there were certain childhood games that I played as a young student, and that's when I started to realize I didn't really understand the impact of them then, but now as I'm older, I realize that my grandmother did not want me to be part of playing into stereotypes, but I couldn't really wrap my mind around what that meant. And just some of them, to give you some examples, there was this game where you would kind of play patty pat or patty cake with your hands, and one of the phrases was, "Black, black, you buy a Cadillac." And she would not allow us to say that. And I couldn't understand why then, because I'm thinking, that's a really good thing, isn't it, to have a Cadillac? But in my grandmother's mind, there was the stereotype that as soon as African-American people got their hands on some money or a bonus, they would go spend it inappropriately. And inappropriately meant that you would buy something that was not something that the family could really afford, some sort of splurge. And that, in her mind, that's what the black, black, you buy a Cadillac represented. Another thing we weren't allowed to do, there was this hand slapping game you all may have heard of called ham bone. And you would say, ham bone, have you heard? We were not allowed to do that. That, in her mind, that played into stereotypical thinking that African Americans were entertainers, that we could sing, we could dance, we could dribble a basketball, we could throw a football, but as far as aspiring to other things, that's not something we could do. So as I've gotten older, I've started to get an appreciation for those things. Did it change how people thought about me? I don't know that, but in my grandmother's mind and her protection coming up from the South in the 20s, she definitely wanted to make sure that I didn't play into it. So I appreciate that as I've gotten older. As Sarah said, now that I'm an arbitrator, I'm a neutral, I'm a mediator, it makes me, I have been mistaken in rooms. Like, I don't look like the attorney. People have thought that I was the client, court reporter, a host of all sorts of things. You don't look like an attorney, you know, those various comments that we've heard over time. So as Sarah said, it just makes me sensitive when I go into rooms to try to make sure I don't make assumptions about other people, that I take my blinders off, and having these conversations is really important that we continue to have those conversations. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Lisa. My experience occurred in 1955 when I was about 10 years old. We were traveling home to Pennsylvania after 10 days in the Miami sun. My brother, mother, and I spent all that time on the beach. And because of our Italian heritage, we get a tan under a light. A regular light bulb will give us a tan. My mother also had black hair, and she, with this tan, she did not look white. My father was as pale as a Maine woodsman in the winter because he did not like the beach or the sun. God knows why he went to Miami, probably because my mother told him to. When we got to Georgia on the way home, we saw a sign in front of a mom and pop motel, which was basically all that was available at the time, that said vacancy. So as was the practice at the time, and especially with my mother, she wanted to inspect the room before we committed to it, because you'd get some pretty sleazy places in those days. We went into the office, all four of us, my father, lily white, and me and my brother and my mother, dark. And as soon as we walked in the door, the clerk said, "We don't have a vacancy for you." And my father was ready to argue with the guy. My mother grabbed him and said, "Let's get out of here." So out we went. I still didn't know what was happening. And then when my mother explained it to me, I just felt helpless, angry. I wanted to go back and explain to him that we're white. There's no reason for you to treat us like this, not knowing any better, of course. I never got over that feeling. And the incident has really changed me and forever. I was quite different after that. And when the DEIB was launched, and particularly the New England group got together to do the education side, I recall the incident and decided, maybe I can make a difference by being on the program. I know it has made a difference in my practice. I do see color. I do see minorities, all kinds of minorities. I empathize a little better with them because of the incidents, and because of time has changed me, and it does affect my practice. I hope in a positive way, although I've had my moments. I'm embarrassed by them, and there's nothing I can do about them, but I do correct them for the future. And every mistake I made in the past, I don't make in the future. I have new ones I make maybe, but never the old ones. What I'd like to do right now is go into the scenarios. Remember, we want your participation. Really need to hear from you. Use the hand raising emoji in the program for questions and to make comments so that we can easily recognize you. It's difficult for us to see you on this large screen. And there'll be at least 2 poll questions, I believe, that will ask you to vote and give us a secret ballot, and we can then report to you what the outcome is. The first one is, arbitrator's responsibility. And that would be Sarah, please. Would you do that one?
Sure. Yep. So I'll read the code section first. Code of Professional Responsibility for Arbitrators of Labor Management Disputes. 1. Personal qualifications of arbitrator honesty, integrity, impartiality, and general competency in labor relations matters. And 2, cooperate in the training of new arbitrators. And the first scenario reads as follows. A white male arbitrator in his 60s presides over a labor dispute about overtime pay for employees with disabilities. The union's representative, a Black woman using a wheelchair, faces frequent interruptions from the arbitrator while the company's non-disabled male attorney speaks interruptedly and is encouraged to elaborate. The arbitrator makes dismissive comments like, "I understand that everybody wants more, but we have to be practical," and dismisses the grievance with reasoning unsupported by the evidence. The union's representative alleges bias against her and the employees she represents.
Okay, this is a poll question. Here's the question. Is the arbitrator's behavior a violation? Your options are definitely no, definitely yes, and it depends on a few other factors. Please mark them and submit it. Okay. Sarah, what are your thoughts on this scenario?
Well, I mean, if I were in the audience, I would have checked definitely yes. Because this arbitrator did a number of things that demonstrate mostly just an inability to be impartial. So the first is interrupting one advocate representative, but encouraging the other to elaborate. I mean, I guess if you checked, it depends on a few other matters. Sure, it might depend a little bit on how annoying the the advocate who was being shut up was being, but in general, you don't treat two people in an arbitration hearing that differently who, it just shows obvious bias. The comment about everybody wants more, but we have to be practical, that's also completely it's both a prejudgment of the case, because I assume that's being said while the case is being tried, and the arbitrator is telling them that they should calm down and not expect so much right in the middle of the hearing. I would call that prejudgment, and I would also call it lack of integrity. Yeah. Pretty much the whole list. And then dismissing the grievance for reasons unsupported by the evidence. I mean, that's just plain old malpractice. That's not on the list, but we have to look at the evidence and come up with a decision that comes from that evidence. And it sounds like the arbitrator was so biased overall that the union side did not get a fair hearing, and that's ultimately a violation of the Code of Professional Responsibilities. So
Yeah,
I'm looking at we didn't get any no's, but some it depends. So that'll be interesting to hear about.
Does anybody on the panel have any comments to add?
Spot on.
Okay, let me, anybody in the audience want to respond? Does that, anybody want to respond?
John, I'll certainly weigh in here. I think to Sarah's word, you know, the M word, malpractice. Yeah, I think there are certainly two different things that may be intersecting, right? You've got the potential issue of just not carrying out your roles and responsibilities as as an arbitrator. Certainly, finding reaching a conclusion without support of evidence is on its own an issue. I think the question is, right, does it actually encroach on the arbitrators, like the code of professional responsibility for the arbitrators? Those I think that's really the key issue here.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to add? How about somebody in the audience? Was this the discrimination because she was a woman? Do you think it was, the arbitrator was reacting because she was in a wheelchair? Or because she was Black? What do you think was going on here? Anybody have any thoughts? Please raise your hand in the response section, and I'll be able to identify you, I hope. Let me see if I can get a gallery going here. Okay. Nobody? Oh my. Nobody can add to this?
Well, I can't find the hand to raise.
It's down below. It's it says react. There's a heart and it says react.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. This is Nancy Farrell. I think the arbitrator was uncomfortable with all of the above. The arbitrator's discomfort with the race, the woman, the disability probably was underneath all of the reaction to that person.
Mm-hmm.
Just generally not being comfortable with the different.
Anybody have any other thoughts like along those lines?
You've got two hands up, John. Chip, Eric, if I'm saying it correctly, and then Pat.
Good, thank you.
I would have liked to have been in the room to try to get a sense as to what the basis of the discrimination was by the arbitrator. I don't think I have enough to know, but it certainly could have been any or all of the three. But I can tell you one thing, after 43 years, well, for 43 years, I was a management advocate. I would have won that case and that person would become a #1 strike on any future panel, because anyone who's going to rule on grounds that are unrelated to the merits of the case and the facts of the case is not, I could just as easily lose to that person. Were I bringing a case where my primary decision maker was pick whatever minority you want to have. And then the other thought I have is, I can't imagine anyone who makes a living as an arbitrator would possibly act like that. I think that's a quickest way to not get business, but that's just the pragmatic side of me.
Who's next? Lisa, did you have a second?
I think, is it Eric? Am I pronouncing it right? You put your hand down.
Yeah, it's Ariki.
Ariki, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I actually put it to, I was saying it depends on the situation, how it is. Because some of these cases, each individual has got its own reaction, his own ways of behaviors. And when you are trying to talk to someone, and he reacted, he began yelling, abusive language, aggressive language, and saying all about, hey, this is African, what is he talking about? What do you know? And all those kind of things. That can ignite more problems. And how much cool or how much tolerant you are, you can even react. And that's how I'm looking at it, because people are so aggressive in today's world. It is not like those years, but today people have become so aggressive more than the past decades.
Thank you.
But
John, Pat is next, and then Angela.
I was going to say that I agreed with the person before that mentioned that this arbitrator probably felt uncomfortable. So many times it reminds me that we are to be neutral. So you have to make sure that you don't have those biases that you wouldn't even know you had. Sometimes people go into a situation and they're looking and thinking, is this a genuine disability or not? So.
And anybody else?
Excuse me,
Angela?
sorry. In addition to what she has said, it is true, even arbitrators and the mediators today do not have, most of them do not have the thinking of the use of neutrality, because everything are being politicized here and there. That can ignite problems too. I agree with what she was saying.
John, Angela's next. Angela, you're on mute.
So this isn't exactly the question that you asked, John, but this is out of what would you do if you were the advocate who observed this behavior in the arbitrator, aside from not using the arbitrator again, or for this panel, for this group, what would you do if you were a member of a panel where someone was exhibiting such and this is obvious, I think, bias? What should a neutral do? What should an advocate do in these circumstances? Aside from the obvious, which is don't use the arbitrator again, which Chip said earlier. But what do you do? What does a neutral do in that circumstance if they're on the panel with somebody like that? I'm just asking. It hasn't happened to me. I'm just asking the question.
I think it's happened to all of us. Lisa, could you? Okay.
Yeah, what I hear is saying is, what do you do in that moment?
Yeah.
And so that you're not totally losing the whole arbitration, if it's, but it's skewing it away from yourself. But in that moment, sometimes taking a break, doing a sidebar, maybe kind of the break period for me sometimes is letting people kind of have a chance to talk or think about what's going on at the moment, but maybe even a sidebar to say, hey, I'm really kind of feeling that some of these decisions or some of the, my objections or something is kind of being one-sided, and maybe in a way calling the person out. But I get what you're saying, Angela. There has to be a way sometimes to even address the microaggression in that moment. And sometimes if I'm in the person's face in not such a confrontational way, but letting them know, I see you, I see what's going on, and maybe it'll help them recognize it and reel it back in. But if anybody else has any ideas, Danielle had her hand up, John.
Sarah?
I just wanted to respond to Angela. I mean, I think, first of all, one of the things that a good arbitrator has to know is how to deal with difficult parties. I mean, it's not like everybody's nice and goes by the rules when they're in an arbitration hearing. So if the arbitrator was frustrated by anything that the advocate in the wheelchair was doing and that would have possibly been seen as giving that arbitrator permission to act like that, I just say you don't act like that, no matter how you're feeling. I mean, that's part of the job. So that's one comment. The other one is, I think you might have been asking what you could do legally. I don't know if you were asking that, but I think if these things happen in a place where there are bodies that you can take ethical violations to have them overseen or adjudicated, this one might be one, that might be a recourse as well. But as Lisa said, getting it done in the room by just taking a minute to de-escalate, another very good solution.
Danielle?
So this has raised a couple of issues And I don't know, it's a little break. So to answer the original question, yeah, I would take a break in that moment. Maybe suggest if I was on a panel, and I have had that situation on a panel where I took the break. I suggested a break at that moment and then had a sidebar with all of the arbitrators for us to kind of chat about how that last comment or that last decision might be interpreted, and suggest that we perhaps go back and address that. But what this has brought to mind is something that's happened to me recently, and it was probably one of the worst situations I've had in a very long time, but it has happened throughout my entire neutral practice. And I've been a neutral starting out as a mediator back since the 90s. And the issue is how to deal with difficult parties and their biases. And so when you see it happening in real time, and you see it in the way they're asking questions, and you can tell their biases. If they are more union side, or if they're more management side, they are not aware of their biases. And so the way they are operating in the hearing is just on full display. And then as the arbitrator, when you try to temper that, and sometimes they react. And so for me, what it has been a function of which is why I keep a record. I know a lot of folks who are not concerned about recordings and things of that nature, but because I am a neutral of color, I see that people attempting to try to play that, use their biases against me, or we perhaps have a real concern that our selection is because of, or in spite of, or it's connected. So, but I recently had that experience where you have to be careful about how you respond to the biases of the parties so that they don't attempt to turn it around and look like you're biased. So when they're biased, and then you try to say, hey, that looks, let's calm down now, let's be civil, or let's not assume, then they, are indignant and then suggest that somehow you have the bias and that there's nothing wrong with what I'm saying and nothing wrong with what I'm doing. So I do think that those of us here who are either advocates and or neutrals need to be aware that dynamic exists as well.
Thank you.
John, Mike Murphy had his hand up.
yeah,
I think he
please.
took it down. So I don't know if Mike, if you still want us to say something.
Mike put something in the chat for SHRM people. So if you
Okay.
want to check that, I think that's it, right, Mike? Okay.
That was Mickey that did that, but okay.
Oh, hey, yeah, this is Mike Murphy. Just real quick. And look, this is just my perception, but I was thinking, since we're in this environment of CLE, well, of course, I'm going to say, well, obviously that's unethical. It's because the arbitrator, isn't a person of color, isn't female, and isn't disabled. At the same time, it could just be an older dude who doesn't believe in disability cases, and he's just kind of biased anyway. But I did vote it was definitely unethical, and you're also just going to run into some folks who are more defense or plaintiffs minded, and you got to be aware of that. So that's about all I had to add. Thank you.
Does he get a free ride because he happens to be an old white male?
Oh, no, it's to the contrary.
Okay.
I'm just saying in this environment, it was.
Yeah. There's really no excuse. I mean, if you're
right. I guess what I'm saying is there also is bias that is just nobody deserves a dime.
Yeah.
And there's arrogance. Well, someone won't let anyone talk. So those things could be layered on it. That's all.
Yeah, that is it. It's not like that's something separate and apart. That is the problem. So it's not like, well, if it's only because of the bias is the unethical part. That's the violation as well. So I'm not sure I understand the distinction that you're making.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you.
Again, the next question I was going to ask is, does he get a pass because he's an old white guy? And my answer is, if you're sitting in that chair, you don't have any excuses for being biased. You want to work, you better get your act together. Otherwise, get out of the business. Okay, let's go to the next scenario. Mishell, this is yours.
Thanks, John. Okay, I am going to be covering the Texas disciplinary rules of professional conduct. So we've got a lot of layers of ethical rules coming at us today, but as John noted, there is overlap within all of it. So the rule we are working with is, I believe it's 5.08 of the Texas rules. But A is, a lawyer shall not willfully, in connection with an adjudicatory proceeding, except as provided in paragraph B, manifest by words or conduct bias or prejudice based on race, color, national origin, religion, disability, age, sex, or sexual orientation towards any person involved in that proceeding in any capacity. So I am going to present scenario 2. I'll go ahead and read it for everyone, and then we'll do a great job of workshopping it like we did scenario 1. During an arbitration over an alleged wrongful termination, Attorney Wong, representing management, questions Mr. Brennan, a white male, a union witness who has a hearing impairment. Wong speaks slowly and loudly, saying, "Let's keep this simple. Can you read this policy? Do you even understand it?" Despite Mr. Brennan's request to use an interpreter for certain legal terms, Wong dismisses the request, saying he seems to be managing fine without one. The union representative, Mr. Patel, objects.
Okay. Mishell, why don't you lead off on some comments first, and then we'll go to the audience.
Sure. And look, I'm a management side lawyer who handles Title VII discrimination cases all over the place. And so my starting point here obviously is, to the question of, is this a clear or questionable violation of this rule? Or is there no violation? And, like any good lawyer, I start with, it depends. And I think there's some, additional facts. And I think in the last scenario, that discussion from all points of view, I think, are really important. There are a couple of things in the Texas disciplinary rule that I think are very important to focus in on. One, and I think the key word, not only in the rule, but also in the comments and further discussion of the rule that we have seen, is the term willful. That's, a lawyer shall not willfully, in connection with an adjudicatory proceeding, is really where we need to focus in on here. So the question is, based on the behavior that was displayed by Attorney Wong, can we say that Attorney Wong behaved in a fashion that shows prejudice or bias because of race, color, national origin, religion, disability, age, sex, or sexual orientation? I'd love to hear the audience's perspective on that. And then I'll go to the second part, because like any good rule, and particularly in Texas, there are exceptions. And I'm sure all of y'all are saying, what does B say? So we'll go to that shortly. But I see Lisa's hand is up.
Thank you, Mishell. This would make me very uncomfortable being in this room. First of all, the person has a hearing impairment, and so they're being asked to read something and then said, can you read it? Do you understand what you're reading? None of that relates to a hearing impairment. Speaking slowly, it's just it's stereotypical behavior for acting very condescending, like a person has an inability to comprehend things. None of that goes to a hearing impairment. Second of all, when a person asks for an accommodation, it's not for someone that doesn't have any training or a clinician to decide whether or not they need that accommodation or not. If they've asked for an interpreter or someone to help them with certain legal terms, that's not the role of that person to decide whether or not that they've met the bar or whether or not that's a reasonable request. So there's several layers in this hypo that would just make me very uncomfortable if I was observing this behavior.
I think that's a great point, Lisa. And I think as many of us who are in courtrooms or in arbitrations, you know, at administrative levels and or whatever the proceeding may be, when someone asks for assistance via interpreter, it is not the role of the advocate to judge whether or not that should happen. In fact, it is to our advantage, right, to make sure we have a clean record and that there are no issues on appeal or discrepancies that may be challenged as a result. Certainly here we are talking about the ethical piece, but from a bigger picture in preserving your record, that is also something that I think needs to be make sure that we're factoring in. I see a hand, I see Renee's hand, and I want to make sure I'm not skipping on anyone. Renee?
So I think that there are some details that we're missing. We don't know the extent of the hearing impairment. So maybe this person does need someone to speak louder and slower so that they can understand. But I look at this differently. You know, I'm an employment side attorney, but I've worked in HR for 25 years primarily. And if you're asking this witness if they understand a policy and they're asking for some help interpreting the legalese, but that doesn't happen in the workplace. They're trying to get to the point where they want to know, does this person understand the policy that was in play? So I don't know that I would have thought that there was a need for a legal interpreter at this point. I think that there's still so many unknowns that it's a kind of a leap to say that this person violated this rule of conduct.
No, I think that's a good perspective, Renee.
Got another one. Chip?
Chip, I see your hand next.
As you read the scenario, the thought came into mind, the question came into my mind, is this more an example of potentially unconscious bias arising? And then the issue is if it is, does that equate to intentional to create a violation of the rule? You know, it is a totally uncomfortable situation for sure. Whether or not this individual intended it to be because of a bias, or he just didn't realize that was something in his subconscious that was effectuating his behavior. And then does that arise to a level of intent? I think that's a difficult question. I certainly don't like the situation. And there are times where someone will say, I didn't hear you. And usually that's not a problem with me because I speak so loudly. But then you just read the question. This was where he was becoming affirmatively raising an issue that wasn't yet presented out.
No, I think that's a really good distinction. And I know many of us practitioners in the area of helping clients with their diversity, equity, and inclusion plans, particularly looking at legal risk, you know, what we're looking at in the space of DEI is unconscious bias. And then, but there's also the other side of discrimination, right? Whether that be intentional discrimination or, you know, a disparate impact, right? Is there something that has the effect of being discriminatory? And so the way I read this rule, particularly with the focus on the rule and the comments associated with the rule, is there is a very clear focus on the limitations, and the comments specifically say, you know, the rule, however, contains several important limitations and exemptions. The first found in paragraph A is that a lawyer's allegedly improper words or conduct must be shown to have been willful before the lawyer may be subjected to discipline. So again, this is a scenario that is meant to help us discuss and dialogue, but I think it's important to look at the specific rule that we are applying to here.
Okay, any further comments on this scenario?
John, I think Chip had his hand up. I don't know if he had a chance or not.
Yeah, Chip just.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that. I apologize. Okay, let's move on to the next scenario. This is what, an ABA rule?
Yes, so this is mine, John. The American ABA Model Rules of Professional Conduct prohibits engaging in conduct that the lawyer knows or reasonably should know is harassment or discrimination on the basis of race, sex, religion, national origin, ethnicity, disability, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, marital status, or socioeconomic status, and conduct related to the practice of law. This paragraph does not limit the ability of a lawyer to accept, decline, or withdraw from a representation in accordance with the rule, and it does not preclude legitimate advice or advocacy consistent with these rules. Now, let me stop sharing. Okay, so this hypo, the claimant, Taylor Martin, alleges that their employer failed to act after they reported repeated workplace graffiti containing graphic slurs targeting their sexual orientation. Martin provided photos of the graffiti and evidence of multiple complaints to HR, none of which were addressed. Throughout the hearing, arbitrator Maria Perez, an attorney and former litigator, appears dismissive of Martin's claims. She interrupts Martin repeatedly, saying, "Graffiti isn't a big deal. This seems like a personal sensitivity issue." Perez also makes comments such as, "Is this really about your work environment, or are you just trying to make a statement about your lifestyle?" Her tone becomes increasingly condescending, and she suggests that Martin might be reading too much into the situation. Oh, John, I think we've got a poll question.
Does Perez's behavior raise concerns about bias and discrimination under the ABA Model Rules of Professional Conduct? Your options are A, yes, as a judge, B, yes, as an attorney, or C, no, not as an attorney or a judge. Okay. Lisa, do you have any comments about?
I do. So I had the pleasure of working with arbitrator Betty Widgeon when some of these were being developed, and we put our heads together as neutrals, first of all, as arbitrators, thinking, and of course, these hypos, some of them are extreme, but some of these really happen. And we talked about the fact that what arbitrator is sitting in a hearing making all these comments? First of all, what arbitrator is sitting there questioning? You may ask some questions if you need clarification or there's some terms or jargon you don't understand. But to say something like graffiti isn't a big deal, this is a personal sensitivity issue, first of all, ethically, you're supposed to wait until the close of this hearing before you're making some decisions about credibility, about evidence and weighing the evidence, things of that nature. It's very early on that this arbitrator is making these calls and calls as far as the weight of evidence and credibility, and then they're signaling the parties what they're thinking. This person is probably chipping away at Taylor, who, I don't know if you caught this, Taylor is using they, them, their pronouns. So obviously this is a sexual orientation matter. And to say that graffiti isn't a big deal, I don't even know that. And again, as Mishell told us, it depends. We don't have the full story, but it probably isn't even about the graffiti. It's about the fact, probably, I'm just thinking, reading into this hypo, but in my mind, it probably isn't about the graffiti. It's about the fact that something about this their sexual orientation was put on a wall somewhere, and that there were some graphic slurs, and there needs to be more sensitivity about that, at least until the record is closed and all the information is in. So that's my thoughts on it, John.
sometimes you can't make this stuff up. And when I was an advocate, a brand new advocate, not knowing much and how to do anything, I had an arbitrator just kept commenting on every question I asked, mocking me, saying the question wasn't properly phrased. I was just coming, brand new into the work and made very difficult. Finally, I said to him, "Would you rather do the case and I'll sit and be the arbitrator?" And he never made a comment after that, except that partway through the hearing, he swiveled his chair around and started looking at the paintings on the wall. So, these things happen, or at least they happen to me.
John, Sarah had her hand up too.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I think this scenario isn't a question of implicit bias. I think it's a question of explicit bias. This arbitrator has real problems with someone who might have a different sexual orientation and is just aggressively telling them that to, sort of button it up, basically. So
thank you. Our poll is up. So 63%, John, said that this raises a concern as the person being a judge, 34% as an attorney, and then 3% said, nope, not as an attorney or a judge. Does anyone else here want to weigh in and give their thoughts? And am I overreading this? Am I weighing too hard on it, or anybody else want to give some thoughts? Stan said there should be a fourth answer, maybe others. Hold on, let me open it up. I would like to have the option to say no as a non-attorney. Thank you, Stan.
Any comments, any thoughts, any personal experiences?
John, Kathy has her hand up.
Kathy?
Take yourself off mute, Kathy. Kathy, can you hear us?
Okay.
There she is. All right.
I was one of the 3% because what occurred to me, I don't know, I'm getting an echo.
We're getting an echo.
You have two devices on, maybe, Kathy.
Do you have your phone on?
We'll give you a minute, and Bieber has his hand up, John.
Okay. Bieber?
Oh, Kathy's back. Hold on.
Is that better?
Oh, yes, much better. Thank you.
I was one of the 3%.
Nope, it's still echoing. Okay, see if you can shut one of the devices off, or at least turn the volume down. Bieber?
You're on mute, Bieber.
You're on mute. Bieber, you're on mute still.
Bieber, you're muted.
Okay, start over.
There you go. Yeah, I think there's an element of all of this that we haven't talked about yet. It seems to me reading the Code of Professional Responsibility, reading the Texas law, reading what the bar has to say about this, there's a heck of a lot of overlap. The Code of Professional Responsibility for Arbitrators of Labor Disputes, etc., short form, the Ethics Code, is a code that both the Federal Mediation Conciliation Service and the American Arbitration Association are party to. So certainly one possibility where the arbitrator is just really out of line is to go back to the appointing agency and raise the issue with the appointing agency. If the arbitrator is a member of the National Academy of Arbitrators, as Sarah and John certainly and others on the call know, we have a committee on professional responsibility and grievances, the ethics committee. And if an advocate complains to the ethics committee, it surely won't be the first time. There's a history of that. And at a minimum, it may be a way for colleagues to educate the errant arbitrator, and improve the situation. And worse than that, there can be some sanctions involved. So I think particularly for advocates faced with what is allegedly inappropriate behavior, there are a couple of other options past simply dealing with it at the time that it happens.
Thank you, Bieber. Any other comments? Anybody on the panel have anything to add to this? Okay, let's move on to the next one. Rod, you're up.
Yeah, thank you, John.
John, Kathy Remkus had a comment.
Oh, I did.
I think I've got it fixed now. Is it working? Okay. I was one of the 3% because the thought that occurred to me was the nature of the graffiti that was being presented and the thought that, okay, there's a degree of reasonableness. Maybe this person is overly sensitive. I've run into people like that. Remote possibility, but that's there. So, but again, if this arbitrator waits to the end and all the evidence is presented, part of that would include whether or not a reasonable person would be offended by the nature of this graffiti.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Rod, I'm going to cue this up for you.
Please. Okay, Rod, your turn now.
Very good. Thank you. So I'm going to address the scenario relating to the lawyer's creed. And this is going to implicate 4 bedrock principles of the Texas Lawyers Creed. First, with respect to an attorney's obligations to our legal system, lawyers must uphold the integrity of the legal system, ensure fairness, and respect the courts and participants. Second, with respect to the lawyer's professional obligations to her or his client, lawyers owe clients loyalty, competence, and clear communication, allowing clients to make informed decisions. 3, with respect to a lawyer's obligations to opposing counsel, lawyers must treat opposing counsel with respect and civility, avoiding hostility and unfair tactics. And lastly, with respect to the lawyer's obligations to the court, and particularly the judge, lawyers must demonstrate respect for the judiciary, follow court rules, and conduct themselves with professionalism. So against that background, I will outline scenario 4 as follows. During closing arguments, Attorney Davis, a male, deliberately misrepresents the opposing party's evidence, claiming that a witness testified to facts that directly contradict the court record. When opposing counsel, Attorney Patel, female, objects, Davis responds, quote, "You're confused as usual," end quote, prompting laughter from his co-counsel. The judge, a woman, reprimands Davis for mischaracterizing the evidence, but does not address the disparaging remark. So when you look at the principles embedded in the lawyer's creed, I think the Attorney Davis, in my view, probably almost hit a grand slam. In my view, he violated the first, third, and fourth principles. He certainly did not respect the courts and participants. He did not uphold the integrity of the legal system with respect to his comments. He treated opposing counsel with disrespect and a lack of civility, and he demonstrated unprofessional conduct. And of course, in almost all jurisdictions, if not all, making ad hominem attacks on opposing counsel is absolutely prohibited in all circumstances. So to me, this is a pretty clear-cut case where Davis violated the Texas Lawyers' Creed, in my view. Davis's co-counsel also demonstrated a lack of professionalism and a lack of respect and civility for co-counsel. And then the judge blew it as well, in my judgment. The judge correctly reprimanded Davis for mischaracterizing evidence, surely, but the court should have addressed the disparaging remark, and it's not clear, but should have sustained Attorney Patel's objection, and then probably outside the presence of the jury, if there were a jury, in this case, severely reprimanded both Attorney Davis and Attorney Davis's co-counsel. So to me, this scenario is replete with violations of the creed, and all this type of conduct, in my judgment, severely undermines respect for the fairness and integrity of the legal system. And so I would invite, comments from our audience.
Any thoughts, anyone? Has anybody experienced any of this kind of behavior? Maybe that'll help, because okay. I can chime in. I behaved this way in the early days of my advocacy, when in the early 70s, very early 70s, when there was a lot of resistance to us public sector unionization, and the lawyer and I, opposing counsel, would get into really personal attacks, and we were known for it. And to this day, that behavior has appalled me, and I had apologized to him many years ago, and he and I had a good relationship after that. But it was appalling behavior, and it just grew out of anger and those kinds of things, which is not acceptable.
Yeah.
Rod, Danielle has her hand up.
Okay, Danielle.
So I was just going to comment that, yes, I've had those in the experience I just expressed in my last comment. This pops up as well. And it was just very interesting as the arbitrator trying to address the conduct of one of the counsels. And I see this over and over again, especially if you have sort of a national practice where you might be in Philadelphia today, and you might be in Arkansas tomorrow, and then you might be in Arizona the next day. I'm finding that there are, cultural sensitivities, the way a New York based attorney might act is considerably different than a Florida based attorney, might be different than a Texas based attorney. And so sometimes we consider all of that, right? And so, you try to be neutral and say, looks like that's not going over very well, and try to address it. But I think there is something that as arbitrators, we have to exercise some discretion and judgment about cultural sensitivities, or sometimes there's this undue comfort. Let's say opposing counsel have worked together often, so they have some of this jousting they go do back and forth. So oftentimes I'll start out and say, I don't know, if you've worked out together before. And so I kind of get a feel for the parties and how they interact. And if I see that they do that, I kind of give a little leeway. And that kind of goes to your point, John, where I've seen where there's that, I wouldn't like to see it, but when I see that they're doing it together and that's just how they operate, I give it a little bit of a and then I guess the last thing would be the experience level. Again, going back to your point, John, that sometimes you have to use your position as an arbitrator to have some teaching examples for people, and you kind of lead them through, and you kind of kindly tell them that that's not how we're going to do that, or that's probably not something that you want to continue on in your practice, And sometimes it's sidebars. You don't necessarily do it in front of everybody, but so I think we have to look at a lot of things in those kinds of situations.
I agree with your comments, Danielle. We don't know what type of interactions preceded this incident in the courtroom. These attorneys may have had a very contentious relationship for quite some time. We just don't know. Or Davis may have been a misogynist or a racist or both. So, in my judgment, though, I mean, his conduct was clearly way out of bounds.
Margie?
Margie has her hand up. You're on mute, Margie.
Thanks a lot, letting me talk. I agree with everything Danielle said, of course. And there's a great article written by George Nicolau called The Escalation of Pain, How to Deal with Difficult Parties. This is totally the arbitrator's responsibility or the judge's responsibility to make them stop. And Danielle's also correct that it is different from place to place, the way people speak to each other. But that doesn't give people, the right to speak however they want in my arbitration room. So I've done this for years, is you start slowly in the room, gently say, I find that inappropriate. Let's move on. Let's ask that question in a more appropriate way. All right. Then second step is like little sidebar, as Danielle said. When that doesn't work, I go back in the room and I will say out loud, I'll say, John, Mr. Alfano, what you just said is not helping your client. And I say, and I look at the client when I'm saying it. And I have found 9 times out of 10 that stops it. It really makes the lawyer angry, and I really don't care. But the bottom line is that it has to be a fair process for everybody in that room. And we arbitrators can't act as if we can't be ourselves and we can't control it just because we're worried about not getting the next case.
Right. Sarah?
I'll follow up on that. I had a client couple, meaning a union advocate and an employer advocate that I had multiple cases with. And the union advocate so hated the management advocate that he really at certain times wasn't able to stop. I mean, he just would get so outraged that he would just pull a John Alfano. We're going to call it that now. But so I would always start, because I was a young mother at that point, with my kindergarten voice. Now. It's not that bad. But of course that didn't work. So finally we came up with that if he felt that intensely, he could get up and leave the room. And so I gave him permission, because everybody knew this was just ruining hearings over and over. If he really couldn't stop, he could leave the room. And I think I got more cases out of those two over the years because we had a thing. If he got too mad, he didn't even say anything about it. He just left the room, and then he'd come back and he was better. So, that's a war story.
I had an incident where I had turned my back for a second, and one of the lawyers threw the finger at the opposing counsel. Now they had a relation. I mean, they hated each other, truly hated each other. And I didn't know it. And the counsel who was the recipient of the gesture said, he threw the finger at me. He threw the finger at me, and I said, did that really happen? And the other guy said, yeah, I did it. So we took a walk out in the hall, and I said, times we want to do this, but not in the arbitration. I'm not going to put up with it. If you do it again, I'm going to ask you to leave. And they behaved themselves somewhat. Well, for them, they were behaved. You can't make it up. Look at, I think we're getting towards the end, Mickey. Yes. I think
Just one more slide, John, if you want Mishell to go through that one. We might have a little bit of time.
Oh, Mickey, can we take a few minutes from you?
Mickey, you're on mute. And I think we want to make sure we share with everyone the Texas CLE number, the code for purposes of MCLE.
I think Moretta has shared that, I believe.
Okay. Can we do one quick scenario, or is time up, Mickey?
Do one quick one.
Okay. Mishell, this one is yours.
Sure. Okay, this is under SHRM, the Society for Human Resources Management Professional Code of Ethics. They also have code provisions on professional responsibility. And the key here is for their members is responsible for adding value to organizations and contributing to the ethical success. During a labor arbitration, James Finney, an HR director, testifies about the termination of an employee, citing previous performance concerns. However, under cross-examination, it is revealed that the employee's file includes documentations of an accommodation for a medical condition, which impacted their performance. When pressed, James inadvertently reveals the medical condition, despite an objection from the union advocate. In quotes, "I didn't think it was confidential since it's relevant to the case," James explains, drawing scrutiny from both the union and the arbitrator. Now, I think this might be a poll question,
Yes,
John.
it is. Okay.
So, yeah, the poll just came up. Is there a SHRM code violation? Your responses can be recorded in the poll. It's definitely yes, definitely no. The code is too broad to know for sure. Let's give everyone a little bit of time to respond. And certainly I can kick it off. I think I got the it depends questions here. I think this one maybe the code may be a little bit too broad to ever fully know. I think there's some additional facts that may be necessary. Here is my opinion. Rod, I don't know if you want to throw in your thoughts and then we can turn it over quickly to the audience.
Can you explain the code again?
Sure. So the HR director who was testifying basically revealed the medical condition during testimony despite the objection from the union advocate. And then he proceeds to say, "I didn't think it was confidential since it's relevant to the case."
Well, again, it's a situation where it wasn't willful.
Say
You
that
said
again.
initially when you read the description that it was an inadvertent disclosure, which I think is a key word because you're missing that willful conduct.
Absolutely. No, and I think looking at it against the backdrop of the Texas rules, I think definitely the willful aspect does not appear to be there, right? Looking at it against the backdrop of the SHRM Code of Ethics, responsible for adding value to organizations and contributing to their ethical success. I certainly, is there potentially a compromise to that's happened by this HR director who, may have now been in conflict with this Code of Ethics potentially? I see Lisa's hand is up.
Yeah, to Renee's point, this is it depends in my mind, because under cross-examination, I'm been sworn in. I think anyone could honestly make a mistake and say something just thinking that it was a question asked of me. I need to fully answer the question. So I can see this as being inadvertent.
Rod, do you have anything to add?
I know that was the point I was making. It was inadvertent, and I think that probably carries the day here.
Okay, thank you. We have the poll response. Definitely yes, 44%. Definitely no, 7%, and the code is too broad to ever know for sure, 48%. Is there anyone from SHRM who wants to respond to this? No?
I don't, when you say from SHRM, do you mean SHRM certified or from the body? From the governing body of SHRM?
It doesn't matter if you're a member of SHRM.
So I am a SHRM certified HR professional.
There you go.
I honestly don't recall ever seeing this code, and I'm not sure who it actually applies to, because I'm not sure how they would enforce it.
Okay.
But that's just my background on that.
Well, and Renee, to your point, the code has, intent and guidelines and very specific applications that I think would need to be factored in here as well.
Okay, any comments from anyone? Okay, time's up. I guess we'll have to close up.
Well, well, go ahead, John, finish your thoughts.
I just want to thank everybody for inviting us and listening to us. We enjoyed it. I hope you've gotten something out of it also. Anybody in the committee have any comments to make? Okay, Mickey, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, I thought it was a great presentation, so thank you so much. Really, thanks to the outstanding panelists. I thought it was really good. Be sure to check chat for the Texas Attorney MCLE number and get your SHRM information in there, and we'll respond to that. The charts and video are going to be put on our website for members, and they'll be there in a few days. We hope that you can attend future Houston LERA events, and we hope to be able to partner again with the Southwest Rockies NAA. Y'all have been great partners, and we really appreciate the opportunity to do that. There is an effort going on to form a Dallas LERA chapter, and if you have any interest in that, please contact Patricia Magruder, or you can contact me and we'll get you linked into that. There is a meeting on Tuesday, January the 21st with the New England DEIB subcommittee that's going to talk about recognizing and responding to bias in arbitration. I'll try to send something out on that so that you can participate in that if you're interested. Finally, on behalf of the NAA and Houston LERA, we just want to thank you for taking the time out of your day. I know you have lots of other things to do, but we really appreciate you taking the time to do that. Have a great afternoon, and remember that the conversation is going to continue for up until 2 o'clock if there are others that want to talk about these topics. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm not sure how many people will stay on, but I hope there's a group that
Sometimes we get the best conversations in these after meetings.
The after party.
Yes. Without the drinks.
we're charging everyone $1 for staying on for this extra time here.
I had a question, and it loops back to the one where there was the arbitrator was having, obviously,
Can you speak up a little bit, Chip?
Sure. Is my audio on? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it was just kind of muffled, I guess. Go
Okay.
ahead. There you go.
This goes back to I think it was the first type of theft where the arbitrator was obviously biased. But any of you, if you were on a panel, either if you were one of the panelists or if you were the party being subjected to this bias, if it were a AAA proceeding, would you consider calling up your case manager? Because I mean, at least the cases I've had, the AAA always have a case manager, and they say you got issues going on, give me a call. Because my concern is you let it go on, you waste all that time, you get an adverse decision, and you're subjected in the parties to a lot more time and expense having to appeal. You're going to get an appeal. At least I would. And I'd rather try to stop the bleeding as quickly as possible.
Anybody have comment? I can make a comment here. As an advocate, early days of public sector bargaining, where I broke in, there were a lot of arbitrators who were fairly new in the business, who were quite concerned, I think, about more work. And sometimes we got decisions from them that I never could figure out where they were coming from. But I never reported them. I just never used them again. That was the simplest way, is, with the vote. I never voted to appoint or rate any of those arbitrators again. I just marked the box unacceptable, and that was the end of it. That was the way I dealt with it financially. They just did not get my work. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, definitely if you're in a hearing where there's a AAA or any other of these, I call them dating services. You definitely can stop the hearing and go talk to them, and I'm very sure that happens. That's all I had to say. Just that if you're all on your own in a case where you were just individually appointed, it's a little harder.
Yeah.
I don't have an experience that was quite as bad as that one. It was just that it was clear the arbitrator, we don't know what universe he was in, but we took a break, and the union advocate and I decided mutually it was probably going a little bit her way, but we just decided we were going to settle the case and take the case away from the arbitrator. It was going nowhere good in a hurry, and where I think her concern was, while it kind of looked like she was getting the benefit at that point, in another 2 minutes, it might go 180 degrees opposite.
Yeah.
And then it forced the settlement. The settlement was a good settlement for both sides. But that's a possibility. That is also predicated, I think, on the relationship between the advocates. And I've probably tried, a dozen cases with this union advocate in the past. And so I think that helped.
Yeah, you always have to remember that if an arbitrator is going to go your way today, that arbitrator is going to go the other way tomorrow. And there's just no way you could trust that person. I had an arbitrator, brand new arbitrator, he wasn't new, he was new to the region in New England. And he wanted badly to break into the New England area so that he could eventually move there. And I used him. I picked him, and somehow I got him appointed to the case, and I won a case that I shouldn't have won. I knew I wasn't going to win it. That's why I used him, because I had nothing to lose. I didn't know anything about him. And I won the case. Used him again. I always scratched him right off the list. And about 2 or 3 or 4 months later, I see him at one of those AAA meet and greet types of arrangements we used to have. And he said to me, John, how come I haven't gotten any more work? He says, after all, you did win the case. And I looked at him, I said, yeah, that's why I don't use you. And that was the end of it. I never saw him again on a list. He never moved to New England. At least he didn't work in the arbitration area in New England. So I had brand new arbitrators that I was working with who said to me, call me up and said, I got a real bad problem. I said, what is it? If I rule this way, I'm never going to work again for that client. I said, hey, look, if they hate you tomorrow and they love you tomorrow, the next day, you know, so do the right thing and nobody forgets that. Do the wrong thing and we'll always remember you as the person who did the wrong thing at the right time. And so that person listened to me, I think, made an honest decision, and that she'd probably be a member of the NAA pretty soon. So it does pay off to do the right thing, at least from the arbitration perspective. And again, as an advocate, I always tried to do the right thing after I, focused my and learned how to get along rather than, try to beat people up all the time. If I gave my word, I held it, even if it hurt. If I made a deal, there was nothing in writing, it was a handshake deal, I stuck with it no matter what. And it cost me sometimes with my membership. But your word is, your word and integrity in this business, no matter what part of the game you're playing, whether you're neutral or you're the advocate, is basically your stock and trade. That's it. Anything else really is just frosting. And anybody have any horrible experiences with arbitrators? I mean, really horrible experiences? No?
I had one fall asleep in the middle of a hearing. Notwithstanding me pounding on the table, and like I said, I've got a pretty big mouth. It was hard to get him up. And so I just stopped.
Yeah.
The opposing counsel says, you want to go wake him up? I'm not proceeding until he wakes up.
Yeah.
Did he wake up?
Finally.
Yeah.
And then what did he say?
Nothing. He had no clue. That was the other one where it was the other bad part of that particular case is that my labor relations representative is female, and she was very pregnant. And opposing counsel, who I think it was the first case I ever had with him, was just being sort of ugly. And she was handling it okay. But at some point, I just thought the arbitrator should take control. And I said, and he wasn't, so I probably threw my hands up and said, I'm sorry, but if this doesn't stop, I'm walking out, and we're walking out.
Yeah.
If you can't get opposing counsel to behave like a normal human being and treat the people in this room with dignity and respect, and I don't probably didn't use those words at that time because this is 25 years ago. I just said, we're walking out and I'm not paying your fee.
How long ago did that happen, Chip?
It was a good 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah, I've been in a deposition where one of the attorneys from a reputable firm asked the other one to go outside. I don't think I didn't offer to help either one of them, but times have really changed.
I don't think Bieber's gotten off, but he raised that in one of his salon, I can't remember, a salon meeting or something. He says, he had that kind of situation. He said, stop. I can referee a fight or I can referee this arbitration, but I can't do both at the same time. And he said they actually started behaving, which I thought was brilliant. I'm keeping that one in the back of my mind should the need ever arise.
Well, I do have a comment on the presentation. These were such in-your-face examples. You know, in the montage at the beginning, I mean, obviously some were from World War II. Are there actually people out there that you've run into in hearings that demonstrate this kind of blatant misconduct?
I have run into it probably as late as maybe 10 years ago. I did a lot of mediation too, and I had people, advocates from one side or the other, when Martin Luther King Day became a holiday, where they were trying to negotiate changes to the holiday schedule. And this occurred about 10 or 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the one of the advocates just insisted on referring to Martin Luther King Day as N Day.
Oh.
And I don't know where he was coming from. And finally I said to him, when I'm here in a meeting like this, listening to you talk like that, I get painted with your brush. And therefore, I appreciate if you don't use language like that, because I don't want to be accused of being a racist by implication. And he just looked at me like he still didn't understand what he had said. I don't know how to, and I've had people say, and of course, I was in some strange, out of the way places doing mediation, and I've had people say, whisper, well, he's a so-and-so, so what do you expect? And it could have been an ethnic slur, it could have been a religious slur, but it's not just related to
arbitration.
Yeah, it's there, and people sometimes have the need to express it, and I don't know why. I just don't.
And they're jerks.
Well, yeah, but I guess we're in an age where people don't have to keep things to themselves.
John, you had mentioned the old white man scenario earlier as kind of a defense, for lack of a better word. I actually did have somebody file a complaint for age discrimination because he was held accountable for those types of comments, but they were perfectly acceptable in the 80s. And so therefore he was being discriminated against because it was no longer tolerated.
My dad was 102 when he died a year and a half ago, and he actually evolved. So my father evolved through a couple of incarnations as society has changed. And if my father could do it, anybody can do it. That's my opinion. Age has nothing to do with it, and you're not a product of your age. I used to think so. You're a product of your times.
It wasn't a persuasive argument on his part, for sure.
Yeah, I think you can say in my day we did this, but in the current days we don't do it. That's just the way it is. I mean, I'm appalled at some of the jokes I told in my dorm, when I was a freshman in college. I say to a prominent person who was one of my friends sharing the jokes, and I said, we cleaned up rather well, didn't we? And he knows exactly what we're talking about. It's appalling, some of the behavior, but it's there. We did it, didn't know any better.
I'd like to follow up on Lynn's comment as well with regarding the presentation itself. The scenarios were somewhat blatant, but they were very detailed, and I find myself forgetting some of the reasons for why I picked one or the other, because I was relying on memory. So if they could be part of like maybe a slide that goes up with it as you read it, for those of us that don't remember, that might be helpful.
Yeah, that's a good comment. I was thinking that along too, that maybe we should have just popped it on the screen.
Well, one thing on the misbehavior by the judge advocate, the difference, I thought it was a trick question because I was looking for both. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, an arbitrator isn't really a judge. So I probably put too much thought into that. But I said definitely as an attorney, that was misbehavior. But I also thought that as an arbitrator, code of ethics, it was a violation too.
Yes. Well, we have to work on these.
No, but thank you. I don't mean to be critical. I was just
No, that's
No, but the feedback is helpful.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for putting this on.
I think, sorry, definitely popping it up, I think is important. I also think it's kind of part of the exercise, right? Because it shows our own implicit biases that we bring to the table and our experiences, and that gets, brought into the discussion.
Well, I just want to raise this. I mean, I'm a Gomez. I'm a Mexican and American, but I know I don't look it. I look more like my mother. But sometimes people say stupid comments around me. And, when I was younger, I probably kept quiet. Now I'll call them on it. Not to cuss them out or anything, but somebody this was like a month ago, for crying out loud. And some woman in front of me in line was talking to somebody about her mother was in I couldn't help but hear because I was waiting behind her to get waited on. Mother was in a nursing home and was always complaining about stuff. And then she's told to her friend, her mother's latest complaint was that her shoes were being stolen. And then this woman says, but everybody who works there is brown, and brown people have, she said, my mother's shoes are very narrow, and the people who work there are brown, and they wouldn't steal them because they have wide feet.
But that's
insulting because, first of all, the only people who work taking care of these people in the home are brown. And so I tapped her on the shoulder. I said, you know what? And I stuck my foot out and I said, I'm Hispanic and I don't have wide feet. So she immediately shut up and went her way. But, stuff like this kind of stuff does happen. I mean, there's no denying that there is discrimination and people make stupid comments that they shouldn't.
But sometimes people make stupid comments because they don't know any better.
Yeah. Or they don't think they're being overheard by somebody who will, be affected by it.
When I talk about intent versus impact and the role that we all kind of have in educating one another, I mean, you can see my last name, Shiraishi, it's an Asian last name. I didn't know anyone Asian until I married my husband. And I made the awful mistake of referring to an Asian person as Oriental. And my mother-in-law thankfully quickly corrected me and educated me on why that was so inappropriate and offensive. Had she not taken the time to do that, I might still be making that mistake because I didn't know any better.
And that used to be standard, Right. I mean, a long time ago, Oriental, but
I think that we all share in the burden of educating people that may not have bad intent, just don't have the life experience to know.
Right. Right.
Are we out of discussion? Anybody else?
I'd like to, this is Edward Valverde. I'd like to add something, comment to what was just said. And I start with what you had said at the very beginning, Sarah, about recognition of bias and willingness to change. It's, without, ignorance is a big problem. But if you're ignorant, you don't understand, and you don't even see, you don't even understand what you're saying. So to me, the key is education.
Yep.
And exchanging information, trying to educate the parties around us, but more importantly, to educate ourselves so that we can be aware. And I've heard the comments that y'all have been making regarding your own experiences, and I think back about all the many things that I observed as I was growing up that were discriminatory, racist, or otherwise, and I didn't know better, you know. And I heard these things, and I, didn't think about them, didn't think beyond what was being said, and generally in form of a joke. But as we have grown and become and come into positions of responsibility, where we have these duties to guide and direct and to listen and to be responsible for conducting hearings, we've acquired these additional responsibilities and need to become educated and sensitive to all these things so that we can, at a minimum, be aware of our own biases and use that as a way to be able to deal with them when they surface before us in a hearing. To a great degree, a lot of these issues, I think, come in the umbrella of an arbitrator maintaining control of a hearing, because when the advocates are before you and you're before them for the first time and maybe the only time, whether or not you ever get to know these people beyond that particular arbitration, you always have the responsibility of running the arbitration and making certain that it's as fair as can be to all parties. And if you can do that, then whether they call you back again for another case or not, you've done your job, and you can walk away from it as having done the best job that you can. Anyway, I want to thank all of y'all for the work that you put into this, and I've gained a lot of information. I'm going to be assessing this for quite some time, and again, thanks for all the comments from all the other participants, my fellow participants, my fellow arbitrators, and hope to get to see y'all in the near future, and maybe at the NAA national meeting.
We're in February in Houston.
Yep.
Oh yeah, in Houston, there you go. That too. It comes before. So for those who make it down to Houston, we'll all
Great
get
program, all. Gotta leave. Thank you much for taking the time.
Y'all take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Happy New Year. Bye.
Take care.
Hey, John, if you can stay on after everybody else goes off for just a sec.
Sure.
You
Thanks.
mind?
Take care.
All right. Thank y'all, everyone. I have a 2 o'clock. It was good working with you all. I look forward to speaking with y'all soon.
Thanks, Michelle.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Many